and he's got the whole crowd in his hands, and he turns the crowd against him.
You're going to have a bigger judgment on Judgment Day than the sheep.
And they run their vans on the grease that comes out of McDonald's instead of gasoline.
Unreal.
Yeah, they all smell like French fries. You know, when you deal with this whole question of the people who are thrown out of the church, Jesus comes to his hometown Nazareth, 4th chapter of Luke. Very famous passage, you know. And he stands up in the synagogue and he asks for the scripture and he reads about the Messiah.
Yeah.
The Spirit of God is upon me, for he is called upon me to declare good news to the poor, sight to the blind, healing the brokenhearted, to deliver the captives.
And this is fulfilled today in your presence.
And the people are thrilled. And they're just pleased. They just can't believe that this Jesus, the boy who grew up, Mary's boy, Joseph's son, he's the Messiah. Wow. And they're all cheering. And he's got the whole crowd in his hands. And he turns the crowd against him because he says what? You know, the prophet is not without honor except in his own country. And then he says, let me tell you about who's going to receive me. And he talks about a prostitute, see, and a Gentile who's a heathen person. And he says, these people will enter into the kingdom before you do. They go ballistic at that. They loved him being the Messiah. They just didn't want him to be the Messiah for prostitutes. They didn't want him to be for Gentiles. These were the people that the religious establishment had excluded. And Jesus said, you know what? They're going to respond to me before you respond to me.
Thank God he let us in.
You know, when you go over the list of what Jesus was upset about, nothing upset him more than religious people who, I love this verse, who go around laying burdens on people. You shall not do this, you shall not do that, you're in this, you're in that, and do nothing to lift those burdens. Yes. Oh, Jesus says it well. You go around laying burdens on people and do nothing to lift those burdens.
You go around the world making disciples and make them twice as fit for hell as yourself.
Yeah.
That's what the message says.
Which means when they become just as pietistic and judgmental.
Yeah, you know, it's what I saw in that verse is that you'll never find, you know, what's his name, Osama bin Laden, you won't find him behind the wheel of the plane that flew into the building, but the sheep do.
Yeah.
You won't find a big evangelical preacher behind the crosshairs of a gun aimed at an abortion doctor, but the sheep do. Yeah. The sheep are buying it. That's why there's a greater judgment for those of us who do teach. Mm-hmm. You know, you're going to have a bigger judgment on Judgment Day than the sheep who have followed you.
I'm doing my best.
Well, you're in trouble, buddy.
Yeah.
No. But I'm serious the people that are hearing these preachers, and these preachers sometimes can overstate it to make their point, and they may not even really believe it as hard as they believe it. But the sheep are buying it. And they think they're doing the will of God by killing this abortion doctor or flying a plane into a building. Those are the same spirit. I'm telling you, that's not the spirit of Jesus or the spirit of the God that I am coming to know.
Well, the emerging church people are all kinds of types. But I'm very interested in a group that has come out of Eastern University where I teach. They call themselves the Simple Way. You know, Shane Claiborne, Jonathan Wilson Hardgrove, a whole group of these people. And they have become extremely intense in their commitments. But one of the things they were doing, if you were to invite one of them to come and speak at your church, let's say Shane, who's a very popular speaker, he would say, well, if I get on an airplane and fly to Orlando, Florida, I'm going to be responsible, because I'm in that airplane, for a certain amount of carbon emitted into the atmosphere from that airplane. My flying will be responsible for, quote unquote, X number of pounds of carbon being pumped into the atmosphere. Therefore, he would write to you if you were the pastor and say, I'm going to come to your church, but you got to get 40 people to promise not to drive their cars for a week, because we figured it out. That will compensate for the carbon that I put into the atmosphere.
Wow.
You see, now,
why not plant trees?
He does that too. You know what they're doing in Philadelphia? They have these row houses. They're building on the row houses. There's no place to put gardens. On the roofs of the houses, all over the Kensington area, this place with these row houses, they're putting gardens on the roofs of these row houses. So when you fly over the city, you can see trees and flowers and gardens all over, and they're growing food and they're eating their own food. Incidentally, they've got several vehicles that they drive, but they don't use gasoline. They've learned from chemistry majors, this is where students at a university really can get on the stick. They've learned how to go to McDonald's, get the old grease from cooking French fries, and they process the grease, and they run their vans on the grease that comes out of McDonald's instead of gasoline.
Unreal.
Yeah, they all smell like French fries all the time.
Oh, they do?
They really do, yeah.
Okay, there are 4 stories that you tell, and I'll let you pick which one you want to tell. Fool for Christ, about a man who paraded up and down the streets in Philadelphia carrying a sandwich board.
I haven't told that story for a long time.
Tell it.
When I was a kid in Philadelphia, I was in downtown Philadelphia, and there was this guy that walked up and down the street wearing a sandwich board, you know. And on the front, and on the front of it, it said, "I am a fool for Christ." And, you know, people walked for him, and if you were walking behind him, you would see they all had smiles on it. He's this crazy guy. And as you passed him, on the back it was, "Who are you a fool for?" And you just see people's countenance change. You know, that's a good thing, you know. Who are you a fool for?